We have Curtis Benzel from Huntsville, Alabama. We have Susan Mahan from Cincinnati, Ohio. And Fred Zweig, right here in the front, all the way from cool Tucson, Arizona. Hopefully it's cooler by the time you get back there, right? Yeah, good. And they brought their spouses with them too, so we welcome them to Columbus as well. And again, appreciate everything that they've done for us here this week. Let's give them a big round of applause. I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to turn this now right over to Kurt Benzel. Please, big round of applause.
See, I got a good group. I got a great group. And really thanks to Todd and Jeff and Eric. Eric is our main guy down in ceramics. And just the staff here, because, you know, I mean, this is an incredible facility. I live in Huntsville, Alabama now, because I got married to my wife, Wendy. She's in the back of the room there. And, but I spent about 30 years here in Columbus. And I loved being in Columbus. At the time I was here, it didn't look quite the way it does now. I mean, every time I come back, it looks better and better and better. The one thing that has stayed the same is this Cultural Arts Center. I think it was a great institution 30 years ago, and it still is great. I'm constantly amazed. I wish we had something like this in the state of Alabama. We don't, but I don't think I have to encourage anybody in this room to appreciate the quality of this institution, but you know, I would still continue to push people around the community to understand and appreciate the level of quality that these guys generate in this institution every day, because it's absolutely remarkable. I'm here teaching a course in colored porcelain and translucency in porcelain. And so we have been busy, busy, busy. I'm thinking that the people in my class are pretty glad that it's Thursday, because that means they're pretty well done doing all the working. But they've worked like dogs. They've listened, they've been attentive, they've tolerated me talking, they've tolerated my mistakes. They've been great, so I thank them for being here. Todd said I'm supposed to talk for 20 minutes. We're 25 minutes behind schedule, so I think I can just turn the mic over to Susan and be done with it. But I'll just zip through a quick presentation. My group, you can go back to work now because you've seen this before, so it's nothing new. I warned them that they were going to have to watch it twice, and they said, okay, whatever. But the first presentation is, when I teach, I talk primarily about technique. I don't really talk a whole lot about why I make art. It's not because I don't have reasons why I make art, it's because, quite frankly, you all have reasons why you make art too. And mine are not significantly different than yours. I mean, they're personal, they're the driving motivation behind what we do. And I don't really want to bore my students with my personal story. I'm sort of as interested in hearing their personal story as I am in them hearing mine. But because I was, asked to do a presentation for 20 minutes, I'm going to spend 5 minutes of my time just sharing with you some of the motivation, the inspiration behind my work. It is, there's no verbal explanation that goes along with it. It's just got a sound component, and we didn't make the big screen, we're on the little screen. But so it's lasts for 5 minutes. If you have any questions during this 5-minute presentation, if you just hold them until the end, and then I'll answer any question you could possibly have. So we'll just get going. Thank you very much. That's obviously, dramatic stuff that I've seen and experienced and felt. I think we could probably walk from here up to the hotel. We could probably walk from here up to the hotel that we're staying at the top of the hill at that Great Southern Hotel. We could probably see as much inspirational stuff between here and there. Every day I'm just dazzled by the beauty that surrounds me everywhere I go. And I think as artists, we're just really fortunate that we have the opportunity to try to communicate, ponder, and appreciate that stuff in public. Because most people, I think, just do it in private, and they keep all that sense of beauty to themselves. And I think it's unfortunate because, it probably wells up inside and doesn't know where to go. But we're fortunate. We get to go out in the world and share it and help to explain it and, dramatize it and hopefully, help other people to appreciate it too. So it's a blessing to me. Are there any questions about any of that? I mean, I asked you not to ask questions during it, but that doesn't mean there aren't any questions. They're all places that I've seen, things that I've done, stuff that I've experienced. And don't ask me, please, how that translates into my work. Sometimes you may have seen some specific reference, like there's a fish and there's a fish. That's true, but I'm not, foolish enough to try to make the fish that exist in nature, because that one's perfect and I'm imperfect. So I mean, I try to avoid duplication. I just try to avoid, or try to engage in appreciation, and I'm okay at appreciation. So, pardon me?
Did you take all the photos?
No, I did not. I didn't take a lot of the fish photos. I did think at one point it would be a very clever grant to write. I could write it as a research grant, and I could go spend 6 months scuba diving and write it all off as a government expense, but I've never done it. So those, no, most of them I did, but not the fish and not the butterflies. So, any questions about that? Okay, I'll go through a couple other slides, and maybe you'll have questions about that.
I have to say I have no questions because I'm in awe.
Well, I'm in awe too of what I'm looking at every day in my life. I'm sure that's what you're talking about. But thank you. So these are just, my work breaks into a couple different categories. There's vessel work, there's lighting work, and then for my whole adult life, I've had a production studio. And so I'm going to go through them, and you'll see some examples. These are older. I think they're probably chronological, but they have been pretty much an exploration of light and color through the use of translucent porcelain. So these are all porcelain. The color is mixed into the clay itself. That's what we've been doing all week, is mixing color into clay. And then you build with that. There's a history of doing it with glass. There's actually a history of doing it with clay too, but not in the West, primarily in the East. But in Western Europe, there's the history of Narikomi or Millefiori glassware that was a big inspiration. And the gold is all 22 or 23 karat gold leaf, and it's a traditional way to repair cracks. It's called kintsugi. I used the technique before I knew what the name of it was, but and the cracks are naturally occurring. If you understand or know much about ceramic history, you'll know that in Asia, and specifically in Japan, there were two periods, Momoyama and Muromachi period, and that was when the Zen influence really took kind of dominance over the whole cultural appreciation of clay. And because of that Zen influence, a big emphasis was placed on respecting the nature of the material. And the nature of my material is to crack. It's translucent porcelain, but it's pushed, in order to gain the maximum amount of translucency, I push it beyond its limits. And once you push any material beyond its normal limits, you start to encounter problems. And one of the problems I encounter is cracking. But as it turns out, I don't mind the cracks, I actually like them. I think they enhance the character of the piece, and it really talks much more about porcelain than if I repaired them and made them invisible. So that's what the gold is. All this stuff is a technique called narikomi, and that's where all those colored clays are built up into very specific patterns, and then you cut across the grain to reveal the pattern. So all those fish are kind of the grain pattern in a roll of clay. And these are the grain pattern also. That little linear motif is a grain pattern also. Any questions?
When you do the gold filling, is it after they've been fired and they're finished?
Question is, when I do the gold filling, is it after they've been fired and finished? And yeah, it's the very last thing. So after the piece comes out of the final kiln, I examine it for cracks. Sometimes there are no cracks at all. Sometimes it comes out perfect. That's nice. It's about as interesting as a 14-year-old girl. No offense to any 14-year-old girls, there are none in the room. But they're pretty, but they're not interesting to talk to. They have no history, they have nothing. So, I prefer talking to the 40, 50, 60-year-old women because they have a little character in their face. And that's what these cracks are to me. This one is, I think it's got a crack in there somewhere, but I don't know. But the ones that I like the most are the ones that have, just a little bit of, that going on. And why? Because it's more like, our lives. I mean, perfection is interesting, but it's not that, not that insightful. I mean, it's just, and so when these come out and they're perfect, meaning perfect with no cracks at all, the history is pretty limited. I was telling them a story downstairs. I had a piece that I made years and years ago, and it was in the governor's mansion during the Celeste administration. They called me and told me that they had broken the piece. They had a big dinner, and somebody, one of the honorees, bumped into it and broke it. So I said, oh, that's fine. And I said, things happen. They said, well, don't worry, we're going to pay you the full price. And I said, well, that's great, perfect. And can I have my piece back? And they said, sure, you can have the piece back, but it's broken. And I said, fine, I don't care. So now I got the piece back and I got a check. And so I repaired the piece. I repaired the piece using this kintsugi technique. And then years later, there was a show down in Portsmouth at the Southern Ohio something museum. And the guy called me and he said, oh my God, I had a little problem with your piece. I said, what happened? He said, I dropped the little vitrine, that plexiglass cover. I dropped it on your piece. I said, did you shatter it? He said, no, I just chipped it a little bit. I said, that's okay. He said, don't worry, we're going to pay you for it. I said, okay, but can I have the piece back? He said, sure, you can have the piece back, but it's broken. I said, it's not a problem, I'll take it back. So then I took it back, and I've been paid twice for the piece, and I still have the piece. And now the piece started out being worth probably about $2,500. Now it's up to $6,000 because it has such an interesting history. I mean, this piece, fresh out of the kiln, like a baby, got nothing going on. You know, I'm not trying to dismiss my work completely, but I'm just saying it doesn't have much history. Whereas the pieces that have been broken once or twice have a lot of history. So to me, it's an interesting process. That's me working.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Are the holes functional or merely aesthetic?
Holes.
The dots.
Oh, the black dots. The black dots. All over everything, the black dots? The black dots are visually functional. And when I say visually functional, I mean that I don't really see much with absolute clarity. The things that I find most appealing are things that I see with some obscurity, like the night sky. If I could stare up at the night sky forever, but if you asked me specifically what I was looking at, I'd be hard pressed to tell you, because I like it when the clouds float through the sky and just, you know, you see a shooting star or something, things like that. I love looking into pools of water with fish in them, because I like the way the fish are visible but invisible. I mean, they disappear in and out of plants. You can't see them because of the ripples in the water, but they're there and you know they're there and you can see them, but you can't really focus on them. But I don't want to focus on them because I'm about 90% interested in the emotional content of that image and about 10% interested in the physical reality of the image. So I put dots all over everything, really just to sort of semi-obscure the imagery. Because I don't want people to look at something and go, oh, fish, is that a trout or a perch? Because I don't really care if it's a trout or a perch, it's a fish. It's a fish swimming around. The thing I like about fish swimming is that sense of movement. I love schools of fish because, you know, they swim along, they turn, and then they're gone, and then they're back again. That's the magic to me. So it's all this sense of obscurity. So that's the practical reason for the dots, and that's why they're always there.
They seem to do a wonderful job of sort of giving a visual clue to the surface topology of the thing.
Yeah, practically speaking, it creates layers of imagery too. I mean, the black dots kind of come forward, drops some of the other imagery back into the background. As you know, as a painter, as a visual artist, we all know that part of our challenge is to create depth in a two-dimensional surface. So I have a leg up on a lot of people because I get to work with light. So I get to bury a lot of imagery behind a thin layer of slip. So that's a gift. But beyond being able to do that, I still like to just, you know, with the surface imagery, I still like to be able to layer it back so that people look at it, see the surface, look again, see the middle ground, look again, see the farther background. So I was telling them this story. I was in Japan doing a workshop, not a workshop, a lecture. It's a pretty funny story. So I had a jewelry business for a long time. So I sold the jewelry stuff all over the United States. And then a woman in Houston saw the jewelry and she said, oh my God, we rep, you know, jewelry in China or in Japan. She said, I want to rep your jewelry in Japan. I said, perfect, because I like Japan. So then she was repping the jewelry in Japan. She said, you know what? She said, they need to see your vessels. I said, they do. And so then she said, I'm going to set up some shows for you in Japan. Her husband was Japanese. So she said, I'm going to set up some shows in Japan. So then, the next thing I know, we're going to Japan on the tour, Bensley Tour of the World. First stop, Japan. So the first stop was in Tokyo, had a big show at the Akasaka Green Gallery in Tokyo. That was great. Then we go down to Kyoto. We have another big show down there in Kyoto, and we're just touring all over. But in conjunction with the shows, she's also booked me. She had a PR firm doing this. She also booked me on television shows. So one time I was doing a show on CNN, and this is a joke. I know you're going to get out of here. No, I swear to God. So I'm doing the CNN in Japan, but the best one was when we first got there. We flew like 20 hours. We got into Tokyo. We landed about at 8 o'clock at night, and the show was going to be on at 1 or 2 in the morning, late night show. And so, but it was a talk show, you know, regular old sit-down Conan O'Brien talk show. And so then I had to figure out, now do I want to stay up until 1 in the morning, or do I want to try to get some sleep and then wake back up. Well, I thought, I haven't slept for 20 hours. I might not wake up again, and that would be horrible. So I said, I'm just going to stay up. So then I stayed up until 1 in the morning. Now I go on to the TV show. We go out, we get introduced, we do the bow, we get our little drink, and I'm sitting on the couch. There's a woman, Japanese woman, right behind me, talking into my ear. No headphones, just talking into my ear. And so he'd say, oh, what is your work like, Mr. Bensley? And so then I'd say, well, my work is about, blah, blah, blah. And then, so I'm thinking, okay, be concise, be concise. So I was trying to be really concise. So he goes, and what is the inspiration for your work? So then I start now, I've been up for now about 2 days. And so I just start talking, answering the guy's question, and I may have been blathering a little bit. But then I saw in the back of the room, about where Wendy's standing, I see this other Japanese guy going. and I'm kind of distracted because I'm kind of looking at him, trying not to just stare into the camera, trying not to look at the back of the room, but the guy is getting frantic. And as I'm blathering on, frantically doing the slashing neck thing, and I thought, oh my God, it means the same thing in Japanese as it does in English. Shut up. Stop talking. So then I stopped talking. So if I was glancing over at Todd, he was going like. So I said, he must be Japanese. But anyway, I think I've used up my time. Thanks for coming, and please support this institution. It is the best. I mean, it is the Rock of Gibraltar. If everybody had one, we would all be better off. So thank you very much.
So now it's Susan Mahan, all the way from Cincinnati, Ohio. I've known Susan for a lot of years, and have always enjoyed her work, and just thought, what a perfect person to have come here. So I really appreciate her being here. So please give it up, Susan Mahan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for being here tonight. I really appreciate that you're here. I know a lot of you have had a long day working in the studio, so thanks for hanging out. Thank you, Todd and Jeff, for making me feel really, really welcome this week. But most importantly, thank you, my class right over there. Thank you so much for making me have such a great time, and I hope I was able to give you a little something to take with you after this week is over. Okay, Todd told us that we would be talking, but he didn't really give us a subject for sure. He didn't nail it down, what we were to talk about. So in thinking about what you might want to hear from me, I started thinking about what is the most often asked question that I get in my studio. And I have a studio in downtown Cincinnati. We have open studios once a month, and hundreds of people come through. And the most often asked question is, how do you do the media that you use, and why mixed media? Why not just paint? And so it really caused me to be a little bit more reflective than usual to try to figure out how to organize that into a talk, and why do I do what I do? And a lot of it has to do with listening to others and then knowing when to listen to my own voices in my head. So I'm going to take you on a little journey. It's 40 years long. I will try not to go over my 20 minutes, but if you'd like to see how I arrived at the process that I used, this is how. Hopefully. As a young child, I loved to draw. I designed clothes. My mother was an artist, a painter, and my father was a very, very creative graphic designer. And he was a businessman, but he loved to write and illustrate. It wasn't really until college that I decided that art would be my profession, and I decided to teach. Actually, my dad wanted me to get certified so I wouldn't be a starving artist. So it was the best of both, right? So I decided to teach art, and teach high school art was my goal. I when you are a high school art teacher, and many of my class this week were actually art teachers, and it's fun to discuss with them the fact that when you're an art teacher, you have so many media at your disposal. You can teach everything. And I was a one-person art department for 25 years at Marymount High School, which was my last teaching job. And I had a facility that was a small version of this building. It had everything. I could do enameling, I could do weaving, I could teach graphic design. My principal, my administrators encouraged me to offer my students a wide range of media. And the danger in that is you become a jack of all, master of none. So instead of focusing as an artist as just a painter, you play with enameling. You draw with colored pencils. You draw with graphite. You play with watercolor. You work with fibers and mixed media because you have sewing machines, you have enameling kilns, you have looms. So why not, right? You want to pass that love of art to your students. I worked with oils. But the problem with the way I was feeling about my work, it's after teaching and learning all these media, I decided that I was really just kind of average at all those things. I wasn't great, and I wanted to be at least really, really proficient at a media. So I decided to work with the one media that I liked the best, and that was printmaking. And I carved blocks, and I came up with this grid system, and I started making portraits with graphic design. Obviously, you see the graphics involved in coming up with that, and a Chuck Close-ish grid, but my interpretation of that, which were hand-cut portraits on a linoleum block. And these portraits are huge, so a la Chuck Close. So for several years, I was lucky enough to be commissioned by different individuals to make portraits. And the color isn't real great, I apologize about that, but I had a lot of fun making custom portraits for people for a couple years, 2 or 3. I was represented then all of a sudden by a small gallery in the Cincinnati area. And I was accepted to the Hyde Park Art Show, which is a pretty tough jury. And the biggest commission of my career came from being in this show. And the wife of a Procter & Gamble executive saw my booth and these portraits, and unbeknownst to me, she went home to her husband and said, you know, you've been talking about doing something special at Procter & Gamble. I have an idea. How about you have these 16 billion-dollar brands that you want to commemorate somehow for the corporate offices? Why not hire an artist for each of those brands? So 16 artists, and each one do a piece celebrating those brands. And he thought it was a great idea. And so guess what? They hired me to do Mr. Clean. I got to do Mr. Clean. They call, all of a sudden one day the phone rang and I picked it up, and this gentleman said, we would like to meet with you in the corporate offices of Procter & Gamble. And I'm like, you know, a high school art teacher going, huh? You must have the wrong number. And they said, no, we would like to meet with you. So I went down and they said, we're going to offer you $1,000, which, I mean, that was huge. It still is big, but it was huge to me then. And they said, will you do this 18 by 18 portrait of Mr. Clean? I said, well, yeah, okay, I think I can do that. So the deadline was, and you'll appreciate this, teachers, it was the last day before Christmas break that piece was due. And we're talking, it was the end of November when they hired me. So in between all my responsibilities of 2 boys at home and teaching, and oh yeah, by the way, we want you to do this piece. So I did what you may or may not have ever done. I probably caught the flu for a couple days and stayed home for a couple days to work on Mr. Clean, and I did the portrait, the size and the colors, but I looked at it and I went, I don't like it. So I painted it instead of that. I painted it. And I loved it. I thought, well, why would they want this grid thing? Why do they want that? I will paint it. And so I painted the portrait. And the day it was due, I proudly delivered it to the art director of LPK, Alan Kastner, and he taught me the best lesson I have ever been taught. I walked in and handed it to him. I said, Alan, I hope you like it. I made my deadline. And he looked at me, goes, what is this? And I said, what do you mean it's Mr. Clean? Don't you know who I am? He goes, this is not what we hired you for. And I said, well, it's Mr. Clean. He goes, we hired you for your process, not somebody else's. Anybody could have painted this. Any good painter could have painted this. We hired you to do your grid thing. Take it back, and I'll give you 1 more week. Well, 1 more week was like December 22nd. I said, okay, fine. So I left. Of course, I cried all the way home. I went, I don't know what I'm gonna do. But he taught me the best lesson. That is when you listen to others. When he said to me, be you. We don't want you to try to emulate anybody else. Don't do what you think we want. We want you. And so I have tried to remember that for the rest of my career. I did it. That's a crop of the final piece. I delivered it December 22nd, which also happens to be my birthday. And I breathed a sigh of relief. And the next week, I got a phone call from Alan Kastner, and he said, guess what? And I went, oh God, they hate it. I have to do it again. He goes, no, Mr. Laughley, who is the CEO of P&G, liked yours so much he wants you to do one for him too. Would you mind doing another one? And I went, yes. And he goes, see, it pays. When you're you, it's good. So that's Mr. Clean. Okay, a little bit after that, I got a little bored with the printmaking of portraits, and I was telling my class about that this week, some commissions. People are funny when they hire you to do a portrait. You know, they don't always like their features, and you try to, of course, always flatter them, but there's only so much you can do sometimes, right? And I got tired of the portrait thing. So I started printing on canvas that was not stretched, but was loose yardage. And I would then cut the canvas and reapply it to make compositions. And I also scribed into the ink. So I'm still using printmaking techniques, but I'm also using a lot of painterly things. And these are some examples of this process, some more detailed than others. You see that whimsical thing I've been talking about creeping in. I did that for the zoo. I apologize, some of these are a little blurry. I had to do a portrait, but it was okay, it's so different. So my work was described as whimsical, which it was. I started getting some recognition for this, which I was pretty surprised. Coming down off the Mr. Clean thing, I didn't think I thought that was my 15 minutes, you know? And I was hired to create banners, designs for Springfield Township and Cincinnati area. They chose one of my designs. Unbeknownst to me, they called me and said, we would like to make a mural of your design. Would that be fine? Can we send you a check? And I went, yeah. I was in a couple competitions at the university. They're the banners. I was asked to exhibit at the Taft Museum. Then the biggest client of all called, Children's Hospital called and said, would you mind making 20 pieces for the neonatal ICU? And my first grandson had spent much of his first year in the NICU, so it was doubly important to me to not only professionally have such a great opportunity, but to do something to give it back to Children's Hospital because it's a phenomenal facility. So first they asked me to do 12 pieces, and as Children's Hospital is known to do, they expanded and renovated, and then they wanted 12 more. So every room has a piece, and these are just a few of them. They had me tone down my colors because they wanted more pastel. And that slide, it's a little more colorful than that. But you see the nature of the whimsical designs. After a while, though, exhibiting in the community of 200 artists at the Pendleton Arts Center, I was the new kid on the block. And a lot of the other artists who paint were starting to take notice, and they're like, who is she, you know, getting these clients and jobs and getting all this attention and awards and things. And they were starting to, I don't know, a little bit of, you know, crickets. And when I'd walk in a room, everything would stop, and I'd go, they're talking about me again. A friend of mine came up to me and said to me, at an art show, he goes, you know, Susie, I don't care what they say about you. I really think you're talented. And I was like, left-handed compliment much, you know? So I decided that it was time to move on from the cut canvas. I was listening to not only their voices, but it was time to move on. And so I started traveling and taking workshops. I enjoyed very much the independence that a GPS gives you, and you can get in the car and drive to Chicago and take a workshop and get to do that kind of thing. You know, when you teach, you don't get to travel except in the summer, and I could go to a workshop in October, and it was wonderful, and it gave me a whole new lease on life and a new influence in my life and work. So I started using new paint techniques and paper. And this is where the techniques that I taught this week are starting to come in. And here are some of the earlier pieces that I did when I was introducing paper to my process. And by paper, I mean painted paper, magazine paper, books, found paper, anything but scrapbook paper. I won't use, you know, stuff that's supposed to be stuck down. I'd rather find it myself and alter it. But some of them, they're mostly pretty big, and a lot of them are very intricate. I apologize, they're washed out. You can't see the color very well. That was for the Cincinnati Zoo. So was that. The zoo. I had a series called The Girls, and they're floral still life that remind me of women that I know. And the artist statement I think you might find interesting. It says, oh gosh, I don't know if I can read it. I created a series of still life pieces that were based on women that I know. The floral paintings I create remind me of women I have known. Some are weathered perennials who appear in my life year after year. Some are flashy annuals who visit just to add color and a little spice. The paintings are made of many layers like these women. Some are bold, some are more subtle. You don't see their beauty sometimes until you get to know them. That series I continue to do, and a designer took a whole bunch of those to Houston and sold them. So I started moving outside of the Cincinnati area, and that was pretty exciting for me. Here's some more with paper. You can see that they're getting a little more intricate. I was asked to do a mural for the United Coalition of Animals. That's 8 feet long, all paper. Few awards. There's my portrait that I told you about. That went to Chicago for a portrait show. This was the most fun and the most rewarding. A Monroe Elementary School, the teacher there is a client of mine, and she decided that her school should start to purchase original artwork from real living, breathing artists in the Cincinnati area rather than buy posters to decorate the common area. And she chose like 5 different artists and presented the work to the student body, and they selected me, and I was so honored to be selected. So they actually had bake sales and all kinds of fundraisers to purchase a piece of art of mine for their art collection. And the only thing that was a little troubling about the whole thing was she asked me if, her name is Janice, and Janice called and said, okay, when you deliver the painting, do you mind meeting some of my students? And you know, I'm a retired teacher, of course I would like to. They're elementary kids, but it would be fine. And so I arrive at the school at the time I'm supposed to, the last week of school, last May, and she goes, come to the gym with me, would you? And I said, sure. Walked in the gym, 650 students are standing there and waiting for me to have a talk with them. And she hands me a microphone, and I was like floored. And I went, oh my God, what have you done? She goes, would you have come if I had told you? And I said, no. So she really had prompted them to have questions. And it was the best. You're a great audience, but I have to say this was the most fun audience I've ever seen. She had this little boy come up, and he goes, who's your favorite artist? And I said, Vincent van Gogh. And they started clapping and cheering. And I looked at Janice and I said, what? Why are they cheering? Because I picked Van Gogh. And she said, we just taught him last week, and they know who he is. So there are some of the adorable children in the painting, and I had the time of my life that day. Children's Called Again. That's a mural that they had me do for radiology, and it's called Beneath the Surface. Get it? So they had a river theme, and they wanted lots of fish and things that are habitat in the Ohio River. And those were the accompanying pieces. Another project was Global Gardens, and so I used photo transfer process with people and vegetation from all over the world. 3 pieces on the rainforest. My most recent project, and you guys haven't gotten to see this yet, this is for the main concourse on the first floor of Children's, and there are 2 projects. This one is called Fun on the River. It's 5 foot high by 6 feet wide, and it's really a 36 by 48 canvas in the center with 18 12 by 12s around it. And the center is just a generic American river scene, and then there are people enjoying activities that one would do on the river. We're talking kayaking and fishing and boating and steamboat like the Ohio River, different docks and the suspension bridge, and these are little vignettes of a couple of the little ones. And it's paint and paper. And then the other project that's being installed, I think this coming week, is called Global Rivers. It's 15 feet long, and it's in 3 sections, and it also is a river theme, but it was to be global. And so I chose the 3 largest rivers in the world, the Yangtze, the Nile, and the Amazon, and they fit together. And there are, birds and animals that are the habitat is that river. The only thing that became challenging with that is there's so many scary things in the Nile River that when I did all my research, I was like, oh, I don't think for children's you want, anacondas and stuff from the Amazon. You can't have crocodiles and things that children will be scared by. So, and I didn't want to go cartoony and make it like what is that kid's game with the hippo, the happy hippo or whatever it is. Yeah. So there I am on my deck because I work at home and my workroom isn't well suited for a 15-foot piece of work. So on 102 degrees, I'm out on the deck slinging paint. And there they are lined up in my upstairs hallway just to make sure they still fit together. Here they are coming along. Amazon on the right. There's the hippo. Paper and paint. You're the first to see it because it's not installed yet. I'm not really allowed to show it. And while I was doing that for 8 months, I was getting ready for some other shows. I did a show here in the Bexley area. These are the roses that Barbara was talking about last night. Well, some of them. So that's my journey. And the point, my point being, the most important lessons I've learned: don't do what someone else you think they want. Listen to the voice in your head, follow it, and do what pleases you to be different from everyone else. Experiment with your materials. Your work has to actually show your vision, not somebody else's. And also always expect to be successful. Have a positive attitude, because if you do, it's going to go a long way. That's it. Questions? Yeah, how about?
First of all, I want to thank the CAC for inviting me, and for Todd, and for everyone who's involved in this, and for Christy for helping, being my handmaiden there, and also all my students, because without them I wouldn't be able to teach. I'm just a little kid who likes to do show and tell. It's real important for me to be able to create and then to say, hey, look, see this? I can show you how to do this. It's wonderful. I am mostly involved with process. I'm fascinated by metal and the plasticity of metal. Most people think of metal as being hard and rigid and unbendable. And I use processes that really take advantage of the fact that the metal is plastic. I do repoussé, I do forging. And I was asked to do a class on repoussé and chasing. And so most of what I'm going to be showing here is my exploration of that process. Very few slides, but I hope you enjoy what I have to show here. First of all, to set the tone of this presentation, a mushroom walks into the bar and says, "Let me have a beer, please." And the bartender turns to him and says, "You're a mushroom. I don't serve beer to mushrooms." He says, "Why? I'm a fun guy." It doesn't get any better, guys. Okay, here's a very blurry picture of me when I was in my 20s. Much more hair, dark hair, and with something that was commonly seen, I was seen with, and that was Dr. Pepper. This was taken back in the 70s. My hair prior actually got down to about the back of my midway. This is a piece I did while in Alaska at the Visual Arts Center. I traveled to Alaska during the 70s, during the recession, and I sent up there to do work because Pipeline had a lot of construction around it, and I was hired by one of the architects to do mechanical design and drafting. And so I went up there and juried with the Visual Arts Center because I always wanted to have art as part of my life. So I've always had either a studio in the house or taught. That's another way of getting studio work and getting art in my life. This is a relic called Reliquary to the Moon. It's built up of plexiglass, screen, a silk screen behind the little faces there. They open up and the whole thing spins as well. And it bolts, construction, and repoussé faces. These were some of the first faces I did. Then many years later, I started doing high relief chasing. And that's where my passion is now. And high relief chasing, you dome the metal up and then push it from the front down to create your shape. And this beetle is approximately, well, the square is about 2 by 2. This is I was a member of the Society of North American Goldsmiths, and they put out a newspaper or a little article, magazine called Snag. And when I first joined, it was called Goldsmiths Journal. And they always had technical names for all of the processes they did, no matter what it was. It was just something technical. So I had come up with it, developed this technique, and so I came up with localized metal deformation, LMD, or whomping it real hard with a hammer and a punch. And I've used it, and it's on my brooch, and I've used this technique and taught it. And in fact, I actually did a demonstration of the process during this workshop. A commission I had, and that's a very small face. It's 1 inch in diameter. And there's a copper inlaid at the top. Excuse me for the poor quality of photography, but I'm not a photographer. This is one I call Peace. And it's repoussé, high, full relief. This is another one. We're talking maybe 3/4 of an inch in diameter. Full relief. This was a piece I did, and it now belongs to my wife as that piece for our 10th anniversary. So I really don't have a great deal to say other than, through my work, other than the plastic is, the metal is plastic. The metal can be moved. I make things that appeal to me. Many of these things are figurative, and I'm slowly going away from that. I raise vessels, which is another form that shows the plasticity of the metal, and with patina. And for a while there, I was making many vessels. And I love doing process in a series. So I'll show the flat sheet, then I'll show the first angle portion of the angle raising, and I keep going, and I'll have maybe 30 pieces that will show the final piece like this. This is more of the direction that my work is going now. These are approximately 2 to 2.5 inches square. High relief. The metal is domed first, and then put in pitch, pine tar, a resin, and then worked with tools from the front to create the shape. The first 2 days of the workshop involved the making of the tools. And I forced these guys to make the first tool very precise. And then after that, they made several different shapes and several different sizes of shapes.
What weight copper?
18 gauge. I prefer 18. I can do it in 12, but I certainly prefer, I can do it in 20 gauge, but I certainly prefer 18 gauge. Gives me that flexibility, plus it has a great feel.
I'm not able to convert gauge to
24 ounce.
24 ounce.
Yeah, or maybe it might be even be 32 ounce, because the 24 gauge is 16 ounce, and that means a square foot weighs a pound. This stuff weighs, I think, 2 pounds, so it's almost double weight. This piece is about 3 by 3, and like I said, it's relatively shallow, but it's just rich. The texture is made with the punch that I'm using to form the metal, and it's sort of in the shape of a thumb, the face of it, and it's struck with a hammer, and the surface of the tool, the face of the tool is textured, highly textured. So that gets pushed into the metal, and the surface is very rich. I can't believe I'm actually able to talk. Another example. Here, a lot of these things are demo pieces. I'm not necessarily making it for a specific thing. A lot of things are for teaching. I taught for 19 years in Parks and Recreation in Tucson, Arizona. I taught for the Central Arizona College in Casa Grande for 1.5 years. And then this shows, again, that movement of the metal and the volume created, more pieces. That little piece up there, now that's 16 gauge, so it's again half again thicker. And it's an alloy called shibuishi, which is 3/4 part copper and 1/4 part silver. Japanese alloy. And there I am now. And this is the pin I'm wearing. Thank you very much, guys.